under the RMA as it exists at the moment, we can reach 100% agreement through a collaborative approach, but still have it go through a contested path. Is that correct? Yes. So the collaboration is a great principle, but it actually doesn't have status under law in deciding the outcome.
That's correct.
Yeah. And my second question is around what is over-allocated. Is it a finite amount that the river has gone? You've allocated every bit. I remember reading a book on an American conservation of water, and that was don't let any of it get wasted by going out to sea. What defines over-allocation? Is it a finite amount and we got it wrong and over-allocated, or is it a result of changing knowledge of the science, the interactions and community values?
It's probably both. I mean, in addition to the minimum flows that we have in the regional resource management plan for each water body, we also have the allocatable volumes. So that is a quantifiable amount for any particular water body. That's how much we can do. As I said, that plan was notified in 2000, operative in 2006. Since then, our science and our knowledge continues to evolve. So we've probably got some now that are technically over-allocated because we understand that water body better. If we could change it like that, it would become technically over-allocated. So it's both, I think.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just on the issue of over-allocation, could staff bring me up to speed on the change from what has been the case for years past when you could have a sleeping right, or consent, I used to call them rights, and now we've moved to the use it or lose it principle. I mean, I'm speaking from experience in that I had a consent for years and years and years that I never used, but now those rules don't apply. So how has that affected the over-allocation situation in terms of reducing it?
Yeah, so good question. Again, or to clarify, consents now have lapse dates, so if it's not exercised, it will lapse so that water is made available to others. And perhaps just to expand on the allocation status, it is a construct of not only the science and what we understand about the resource, but also where the community wants that resource to be managed. So if you want to put more water or leave more water in a river, your allocation status might change, because it might mean that the water you've given away prior to that means that you're over allocated. If you want to have less water in the river, it might mean that you're at or under allocated. So it's kind of a construct of not only your technical understanding but also community expectations and values, where you want the level to sit, basically. And certainly one of the other big challenges, and it's the real value now of metering and telemetry, is the allocation status is based on consented rates and volumes, so that's what we issue, but that might not necessarily what is actually being used, and so therefore that might provide the opportunity to create some efficiencies by identifying where people perhaps have more water than they actually need once they actually start understanding their water use requirements, and so therefore that water becomes available for others.
Can I follow that? In the presentation, the word over-allocation was used, which is a big word that goes up in big bright lights. But in answer to Councillor Scott's question, the answer was technically over-allocated. What is the difference?
Oh, I think I omitted, perhaps to cover off what Mr Maxwell has just talked about, that you could have changes around community expectations or community demands, which see the minimum flow increased on a river. The allocatable volume will have to change accordingly. It will reduce, and we may already be in a cycle where the consents have been issued. So there's a long, you can't have an instant clawback. So there's a process that has to be gone through, and in the meantime, that is technically over-allocated.
I think if I can push it slightly better, because I mean it really is at the heart, at the high level of some of the debates. could I put it, except in the drought conditions we've just seen, going all other, years, we actually aren't over-allocated in use. That's a question, not a statement.
If everything was metered and we knew the actual use, then I think yes, the actual use is less than the allocation volume, and therefore, in that particular year, as you say, we're not over-allocated in use. And it does come down to, in the planning document, we have a limit, we have, as Ian said, a consented allocation, and there is an accounting process there. So it is the terminology that is often the problem.
Perhaps will probably come up in the next part of the presentation, but I just wondered, in setting the scene, Mr. Maxwell might just briefly tell us how a minimum flow is set, the process that we need to go through to establish a minimum flow, and could you just develop the legalities around a minimum flow, because there's been lots of discussion around minimum flows, and I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding about what they are and the legality behind them.
So certainly I can cover off your second point later in the presentation, but just in terms of flow setting, there are a multitude of components to it. But first of all, there is a technical assessment of the relationship between the amount of water in a river and how much habitat that provides for things that live in it. That's not the deciding factor on where you'd set a minimum flow. That basically is, as I put it, that's science informing a policy discussion. So basically, science derives a currency for negotiation with the community. So how much do you want in the river and how much do you want out of it? Because if you take water out of it, you will impact things that live in the river. If you leave it in the river, you'll impact on businesses and communities that live around it. So it's a balancing exercise, it's a trade-off, it's a discussion that you have with the community in a policy development process like the Tūtakuri Ahuru Ngāroa catchment process, where the community puts its position, it debates where it wants the resource to go, and then that's put into a policy and consents are then issued around that.
So just to tidy up, Mr. Chairman, so it would be fair to say then, Mr. Maxwell, that a minimum flow in reality is a community decision.
Generally, yes, they are.
Is that a fair comment?
Yep.
It's we, as the council, representing the general public.
Correct.
I think, Councillor, if you could perhaps envisage it like this, the scientists will come up with what you could call an ecological bottom line, but the broader environmental bottom line, it may or may not be the same as the ecological one, but it will have the input from the community and its values.
I think there's one other bottom line there that we have to consider, and this is where probably New Zealand differs from other countries in its legislation. And that's this wonderful document called the Resource Management Act, which I swear by, if other people don't. But Part 2 of the Act, Section 5, says quite plainly that in providing for the economic, cultural and social well-being, and while protecting the life-sustaining capacity of the water. Is that correct? So you still have to. That is a bottom line that cannot actually be overcome under any circumstances. Life-supporting capacity of the water must be maintained. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'm sure there'll be more questions once we get into Maxwell's.
Sorry, I haven't got the screen here, so I'm just going to have to turn around and see what comes up. So just putting some context around it. So, like I said earlier, I want to make some points of clarification about the paper at the end of this presentation, but perhaps just to reinforce the sort of key messages that come out of it. So I think you've seen this figure before, recognising or identifying the fact that we did have a significant natural climatic event that we were coping with. And as the most significant thing you'll see is, the mouse works, if you have a look here, this is the top part of the Ngāroa catchment, You can see that it had significantly less rainfall during that period than the forecast would predict. So it was an area that wasn't receiving its normal rainfall, and that had some significant impacts on flows over the summer. And perhaps this is best recognised in a hydrograph. So this is a hydrograph which indicates flow over time, and we've superimposed here for you two extreme events. One was the 82-83 drought, and one was the one we've just come through. And this is the flow at Fern Hill, which you can see for last year. Basically, from about January through to April, there was virtually no, a very, very low flow in the river. That's a product of the fact that we had large blocking anticyclones over much of the country for a long period of time that didn't get water into the head of the catchment. And as you'll see in the paper, in a normal year, in one of the hydrographs in a normal year, that doesn't happen because the rain coming, the moisture-laden westerly fronts come over into the top of the catchment, fill up the top of the catchment, and that flows down to the sea. So we can have no rain here, but it can be raining in the top of the catchment. And so normally the Ngāroa is pretty responsive in that sense. And, you know, this year the river did get very, very low, down to about 1,300 litres a second. In 82-83, for a period of time here, it virtually dried up. So if we go to Whanawhana, which is a flow recorder further up the catchment, it has an audited flow record that we've just produced. It's probably our most reliable record for the catchment at the moment. If we look at the 61 to 2012 record, with a couple of years omitted because of gauging or monitoring issues, 2013 was the lowest flow on record for that site. So just again reinforcing that this was a particularly significant natural climatic event. And this is where it really hit home for the irrigation community, because as you can see there was a period between February and March when there was the river was on ban for an extended period. It did have other events beyond that, but they were relatively short in duration. Again, reflecting a lack of rain in the top of the catchment. So if we're focused on Twyford area at the moment, which is the area where the issues really came to a head, there are three general areas that were identified in an assessment council did in a hydrogeological sense when the consent replacement process took place in 2009, and identified three broad areas, one of which doesn't have any connection to minimum flow sites, one of which is connected to the Raupery stream, which is a small spring-fed stream in the sort of heart of the Heritonga Plain, and one of which is connected to the Ngāroa River at Fern Hill. And it was the latter one that caused the most impact on the irrigator community this year, or last summer, sorry. So what did we do? What were the key things that we did during this event? We worked with the Twyford Irrigator Group. They brought proposals to us and we worked really closely with them, and we got some augmentation underway in the Raupery stream, where water was pumped from a nearby bore into the Raupery to maintain its flow. We transferred consents, so in the unconfined zone of the catchment, we transferred consents that weren't linked to minimum flows but had the same type of effect into areas where they were linked to minimum flows to allow people to irrigate in those areas. We allowed transportation of water from bores not within the zone into the zone for irrigation. We made sure that people were aware of what they were legally able to do under the permitted activity rule in terms of taking water for domestic and stock supply. And we also tried to provide as much data as we could and information as we could to the irrigator community to help them manage as well as they could themselves through mobile optimised data.
Yes. Well, you go.
Well, my question came It relates to the permitted activity rule. How specific is that, and how much of that rule was able to be applied to use for permanent crops?
I don't know what material effect it had for irrigators, recognising that it's relatively small.
Can you explain just what is under that permitted activity rule? What is permitted under that take?
So they can take up to 5 litres a second and up to 20 cubic metres per day for stock and domestic use.
Yeah.
For any purpose, and that take can occur while the river is in ban conditions.
Even though even though they may be connected to the river.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's no restriction. That's only for stock and human drinking.
It's for any purpose.
Yeah. So there was a small amount that.
Yeah. I don't know whether that had a material effect, but we made people aware that was an option for them amongst any other interventions or solutions that we could bring to the table.
Councillor Curtin.
Mr. Maxwell, can I just take you to the point you were making about communication with the irrigators and ask a couple of questions around that, and that's where you're up to in your presentation. If I could just take you to your graph at paragraph 11, page 115. We've already had the one over the next page which compares drought to drought, but this one compares what might be termed a normal season with 2013. Is that right?
Correct.
Can I just, if you look at that graph, you can see substantial peaks in October, November, December occurring, and no such peaks occurring in the 2013 year. Is that right?
Yes.
So my question to you, in terms of information or processes that the council has to convey that information to people, were we in a position, or is it possible from our data to be flagging problems arising from that data set, particularly from October to December? Is there anything in that we have, or that could have been more predictive for growers and irrigators?
So you're asking, could we have sort of picked up some trends at this point? And the short answer is that we hadn't used hydrographs to do that, but we'd been using climate records to say, yes, actually we're heading into a period of significant lack of rainfall. So by December we were engaged with the Twyford Irrigator Group,
Yes.
particularly, and we were already trying to figure out solutions to some of these issues. So,
Sure.
but again, it is speculative because it could literally rain the day after.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's always that. But my point is, how early is it reasonable for us to have taken the steps, and when did we take steps? And you've mentioned the December discussions, and I'd just be interested to for you just expand on that a little, to state when we knew something and when we did something.
Well, I guess we knew that we were going into conditions that weren't a traditional Hawke's Bay summer. They seemed to be prolonged dries in that, or drier periods in December. At that point, we already had the irrigators coming to us, and we were engaged with them around issues like the augmentation for the ropery. How could we do this? What was practical? What was feasible? Let's get a consent process underway. Beyond that, it was reactive in the sense that any additional people coming to us, we were looking for solutions for them at that point. I can't recall exactly when the Drought Committee was convened, but I think it was about that period. It was prior to Christmas, and in the Drought Committee were all the key industries represented in terms of the sectors and the irrigators. So we were using that mechanism to engage with them and keep them informed. And otherwise, we were reacting as people came to us and helping them as best we could.
Just finally on that, bringing those issues back to council, what's your recollection of councillor engagement on that?
In terms of the Drought Committee, or more broadly?
The information coming back to council for council
So the councillors were involved in the Drought Committee. We had regular updates to council around the status of the region in terms of climate, flow, river flows and climate. So we didn't have any specific agenda items, but we were updating the council as we learnt, as we were understanding what was happening as best we could.
Just the graph that was previously shown, page 116, the 83 drought, which was a river, in late March for an extended period, looks like the river was completely dry. And if that was the case, was there any low flow restrictions then, or was it just open slather? And if we had that situation now, would possibly the red graph been down there at the same level? Would the river been pumped dry if there hadn't been a low flow regulation?
It's possible. I mean, it's speculative that what would have happened. Certainly 82, 83, there was a different water management regime to the year that we've just had. It's possible that there might have been a different outcome, but it's very difficult to make that assessment because we simply don't have any evidence to suggest which way it might have gone. But I guess that is one of the, if there is a positive out of this, is that during a particularly low period, a particularly dry period, that we did manage to keep water in the river, recognising that it did get very low and recognising that the negative to that was the significant and serious consequences to the irrigated community.
Councillor Rem as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is perhaps related to this topic and also perhaps future lessons as well for council regarding engagement with the irrigators, point 35, and just wondering whether, with hindsight, that you wish had council been a little bit more proactive in dealing with it and in helping the irrigators, or do you think that it would have been a good idea to involve the councillors at a much earlier stage when the help signs were starting to come out?